Welcome to the June 27th, 2024 City of Orville Planning Commission / Historical Advisory Committee meeting. Please call roll.
Glenn Arasi.
Here.
We'll note Marissa Howland is absent. Natalie Sheard.
Here.
Warren Jensen.
Here.
Terry Smith.
Here.
Wyatt Jenkins.
Here.
Perfect, thank you.
Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Is there anybody here to speak on non-agenda items? No? We will begin the public hearing. Staff report for, before that, should we go this way, or would it be better to renumber them since we have a consultant here? You want to go 1 through 3, or 3, 2, 1, or 2, 3, 1?
Connor's not on yet either.
Nope.
Well, then let's do 3 at the pleasure of the Planning Commission and do the
Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
the interim transportation threshold now.
Oh, that's the one that fills. Oh, because we have the consultant, okay.
All righty. At the last meeting, if you will recall, we had a staff report which talked about meeting CEQA transportation thresholds and shifting our general plan and our evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle impacts to vehicle miles traveled from level of service, which level of service has to do with the size of the roadway. Vehicle miles traveled has to do with the air emissions associated with vehicles. I was not able to answer all of the questions raised by the Planning Commission at that time, so we tabled the topic, and we have with us an expert from PlaceWorks who did the analytical work for us on this topic, Mark Teague, who's here to address the Planning Commission and hopefully answer all the questions.
Can you hear me? Is that on? It's not green. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for moving me up in the agenda. Very, very gracious of you. My name is Mark Teague. I'm the managing principal for environmental services for PlaceWorks. I not only do that, but I also have a number of hats that I wear with current planning. I write general plans, do zoning codes, and I'm also the city planner for the city of Weed, California. So I sit in Patrick's chair occasionally and understand the frustration with some of the bureaucratic nonsense that we have to deal with. About 13 years ago, in order to approve a stadium, the CEQA world was shaken up a little bit by the removal of level of service as a means of determining significance for transportation impacts. What was put in its place was vehicle miles traveled, and that's a measurement of the type of trips that you would take to go to the store, go get a cup of coffee, take the kids to school, soccer practice, those sorts of things. The logic behind that is that level of service, as it drops, is really just annoying you. Yes, you're sitting in traffic, the car is running, but vehicle miles traveled is a different metric that talks about the efficiency of your network and allows you to understand that you're reducing greenhouse gases. And so this was initially how it was sold to the public. Go ahead and set aside reality and things because you live in a rural part of the state. Fast forward a couple of years, and the Office of Planning Research put together a set of guidelines to explain to the rest of us how this works. Now, my personal belief is that VMT may be a fine metric for San Jose or Los Angeles or San Francisco, but that it doesn't work very well in the rural parts of the state, where if there's a bus that's once a day or once every other day, isn't really conducive to people who have jobs or need to get kids to school. But I digress. The guidelines allow for us to establish rural thresholds. Now in CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, we measure everything that happens with the project against a threshold of significance. Now, you may have seen Appendix G out of the CEQA guidelines. It's a checklist that talks about aesthetics, biology, cultural resources. Those really aren't thresholds, although we use them as such in most communities. The level of service, when it's baked into your general plan, means that you have to try to make that. When it's part of a CEQA threshold to make that, we can do a statement of overriding considerations, which allows you to move past the level of service threshold. So to example, say you get a Costco. Costco's going to make a road blow up. You don't care because you want the Costco. You go ahead and say, because of jobs, sales tax, these things, the project is worth the impact we're putting up with it. You can do that in CEQA. You cannot do that with your general plan. If you've established a line in the sand and said, this is our policy, then you must meet that policy because, as you know, as commissioners, you cannot approve something that's inconsistent with your general plan. You get yelled at for that. In the CEQA world, then, through the VMT process that was set in motion a decade ago, what we did was to take a look at the general plan. We make one small change that says we still think LOS is a reasonable means of measuring the roads that we have in our community. But in order to be consistent with the state, we'll take a look at vehicle miles traveled. And Fair and Peers, who did the work for Butte County, I also wrote those interim standards, has come up with this map, which is based on RTP-SCS, isn't that great? Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. You know, Caltrans loves their acronyms. What this data represents are places in your community where VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is already below the county threshold. This allows you to not worry about projects in general in those areas. There may be other CEQA reasons to worry about it, the size, the emissions, those sorts of things. But by and large, if it's in the green areas, it would screen out of needing to do a VMT analysis. The VMT guidelines that we've prepared for you also give you other options to screen out. Size of projects, types of projects that are in here, we've listed as screening. Those largely come from the OPR, Office of Planning and Research, guidelines, and some from Fair and Peers' own recommendations for these types of things. For example, one of the guidelines, the guidelines are silent on emergency access. We know that having two ways in and out of areas is essential. If you look at the guidelines that OPR has put together, an additional roadway increases VMT and it's the end of days. Well, because I understand where you live and we understand where you live, we've exempted that if the LOS is adequate and is going to be adequate afterwards. It's emergency access, it's not capacity enhancing. So, the screening criteria does not mean, if you don't screen out, doesn't mean you go to an EIR. It means you may have to do a little analysis to see if there's things you can do to your project to reduce the VMT. That's it. That's all that means. On paper, the switch from LOS to VMT should eliminate the need to do a lot of traffic reports, traffic model runs, and so forth. In reality, we've discovered that you end up doing both. So it's a regulation that was intended to reduce this, and it hasn't really worked that way. By establishing thresholds like we've recommended in this report, and by amending your general plan, we can use a provision of the CEQA guidelines called Section 15183. And what that says is, if you've done an EIR for a general plan or a zoning, and you have a project that is consistent with the general plan or zoning, unless there's something peculiar to the site, you don't need to do any additional CEQA. So I think you were talking at the last meeting, I don't want any more CEQA. It's nonsense. We're trying to encourage development here. What are you doing? Well, what I'm trying to do is give you a lot of options to streamline the process or eliminate the process using the gobbledygook that's in here that it's written for CEQA professionals and may not necessarily be understandable to everybody else. Through this, by adding an addendum to your general plan EIR, we now make it part of the EIR, and you can rely on 15183 for a lot of your future projects. So if it's consistent with zoning, it's consistent with the general plan, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. You can file an exemption to go with it, unless there's something odd. So what would be peculiar? Wetlands, something that hadn't been analyzed, maybe a cultural resource, maybe there's a historic building or something on the site, right? Now, even if you have those items, if there are standard conditions of approval or standard mitigation measures that can apply, you can still use the exemption. It's probably the most powerful CEQA streamlining tool in the CEQA guidelines. It's been there almost since the beginning. The jury's out as to why it's never been used, but I can tell you that it is very, very much used now in the rest of the state. Because if you spend millions to do a general plan and the EIR, and you go through years of process, and then somebody comes in and builds it like you asked them to, asking them to do additional CEQA seems a little unnecessary. So, back to what we have tonight. We have a general plan amendment recommendation that moves from maintain to strive. That gives you the flexibility to say, still going to use LOS as a rubric, however, we're not beholden to it. We have the ability to be flexible when we're looking at projects. Gives you that flexibility, that discretion. We're going to adopt the thresholds that we have in here, which mirror those of Butte County, so this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody, that simply says we're not going to get in the way of the state. Most of the emissions that people are worried about for greenhouse gases associated with vehicle miles traveled are outside of your purview. You can't moderate what goes into gasoline or diesel. You have no way of telling people to buy electric cars or what they can do with that's all state. What we've said here is we will stay within the parameters that we have. We will adjust ourselves regionally, and we'll take a look at it on a regular basis. The map that you see before you should be considered dynamic. It's going to change over time as projects get built, people come in, roads get built. This will get changed, and about every 5 to 7 years, they go through and redo the RTP-SCS, and this map will change. May not change dramatically, may not change at all for the first couple of times, but as the city develops, there will be changes. And these thresholds are dynamic enough to change with them. So subsequent projects will be able to come in and use the new information. You won't have to readopt these each time. We've left it interim because if there's any justice in the world, there will be more clarity that comes out of the use of VMT, because it's not a metric that actually exists in the real world. This was created by climate scientists to measure land use efficiency. Traffic engineers don't really know what to do with it, and yet we make the traffic engineers do all the work because it's a little bit of torture. We enjoy them having the numbers, and they have the models to run. But ultimately, we're hoping that more clarity comes out, and ultimately there will be a court case on this. And when that comes out, we'll end up having to modify the guidelines. Now, CEQA allows you to adopt a threshold going through a process. The process is a public hearing, which you've had, and substantial evidence, which we've provided. Now, it's entirely up to the commission. You can adopt this or no. But just know this, LOS ceased being a threshold that could be used for significance almost a decade ago. The courts ruled that as soon as SB 743 was put into place, LOS died as a means of triggering an EIR. So, I mean, that actually works in your favor because you're not a big fan of the documents, which I totally understand. So, having said all that, and I did watch the meeting, that's how I know these things. So I tried to cover all the questions you all had that I saw on the meeting, and of course I'm here this evening and happy to answer any additional questions.
Warren? Or Glenn? I know you had some questions too. I have some questions even
Go ahead.
on the map.
Go ahead, I'm wondering.
Are we using, is this the map we're using? I think we were told this was commercial before.
Okay,
maps.
that map is simply background information.
Okay.
It's not embedded in your threshold. The screening thresholds that we're using.
So those wouldn't, what were they called on the BCAG site? TAZ.
Yeah.
So what they do when they build the traffic model is they break the region up into little pieces called traffic allocation zones, TAZs. And within each TAZ, there's usually an existing land use and a proposed land use. And they assign all sorts of numbers to those, and then they run it through the model, and then they link it all together. So some of these are likely TAZ-based, some are based on census tract and go way beyond the city, and that's why some of the data gets a little wonky. we're pirating data from BCAG. We're not doing our own study because honestly, it doesn't really matter. Within these areas, the areas that are green, you pretty much automatically screen out of the VMT analysis, and that's really all that means.
I would personally just like to see it all green. I mean, the white areas mean, I guess, a different type of data, and then the gray areas are probably no data at all.
Correct.
As I recall, the white was not enough information to analyze, and then the gray was not analyzed,
That's exactly
as I
right.
Yeah.
recall.
Remember, the BCAG model was run citywide.
Yeah.
And this was a piece taken out of that. Certainly, if we wanted to throw some more money at the traffic engineers, they could probably do something like this. A lot of this is based on road sizes, connectivity of roads. So if you have roads that don't have a lot of connections or end up in cul-de-sacs or just are giant loops, that's not going to be conducive to allowing vehicles because you have to make the whole loop in order to make things happen. Also, a lot of the traffic modeling is based on what's there. Is there a grocery store? Is there a school? Is there something that would either be employment or retail based? Because if everything's close together, then the trips are shorter and you also have more options to walk. Now, I personally find that a little interesting because I can walk to a Home Depot from my house, but carrying home a sheet of plywood is a little complicated on a bicycle. So there are some things there that are a little different. That's why there's an employment VMT and a population VMT, right? Because the guys working at Home Depot might be able to walk, but anybody else probably wouldn't.
So automatically they would, it would not trigger an EIR in the green areas, and it would in the white areas?
Disassociate yourself with the EIR trigger.
Okay.
That's not what this is about. What happens in the green areas is you wouldn't have to do additional vehicle mile traveled, VMT analysis.
Okay.
So that may or may not trigger an EIR. It may be too large and you have to trigger an EIR for whole lots of reasons, but that wouldn't necessarily be one of them.
Okay.
I think what you're saying is that an EIR would be triggered if they're proposing something that is either not covered or analyzed in the general plan's EIR. Is that what you're saying?
Again, you guys jumped all the way to EIRs.
Sorry.
There's lots of steps before you get there.
Yeah.
The first thing we do is we look at it. If it's consistent with your general plan and zoning, as you mentioned, you can use an exemption if it fits within the parameters.
And that could be exempt from our planning staff. It doesn't have to be,
It's not
the
state.
consultant doesn't have to hire somebody to look into that and do it.
Pat could do it,
Okay.
and Wes can do it, and if they are confused, they can email me and I can send them an example.
That'd be probably similar to what we see as a,
What we see in our staff reports a lot
Exactly.
of
That was
times
an
on projects
exemption,
that we're evaluating, yeah.
Yeah, so there's nothing in here that automatically triggers an EIR. So, and I heard a lot of that on there and I was kind of yelling at the screen, no, stop. Okay, this is simply what we look at staff. This is helping staff, and the applicant comes in and says, hey, you're in a green area, you're consistent with the general plan, it works, we're good here, let's move on. And that would allow us to do that. If you're in a white area, you might have to look at it, but that isn't a $200,000 traffic study. That may be a $10,000 or $15,000 study to just see what you do and what you can accomplish. But also BCAG and others have come up with mitigation measures, standard mitigation measures that could be applied that might solve the problem anyway. And you can reduce it. And there's lots of other acronyms. CAPCOA, for example, has come up with a whole report that's about yay thick that has a number of measures that might be able to apply. Both Wes and Pat have access to that. They could apply that. So even if you're in the white area, it doesn't mean it's the end of days. It just means we might have to look a little deeper to make sure we've cleared that hurdle.
all right, thank you. That
So
explains that a little bit better.
Part of that would be potentially redesigning the project, creating a bus stop at the location, bicycle paths, pedestrian walkways. All of those are valid mitigation measures that we can use here in this rural area.
And that would just be by speaking with staff rather than having to hire consultants to.
Yes. Yeah, it's a list. It's all available online. And there's no reason to hire a consultant or have anybody come in and do that. Wes and Pat can do that easily. And you can evaluate it easily because most of them have numbers associated with them.
Isn't there any exemptions for cities that have 21,000 residents?
I wish there were, because I work in cities that have 600 residents, and we still have to. I work in cities that have 600 residents, and it's troubling to have to go through some of this.
Because I mean, we have, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I don't have any answers for you
Level
there.
of service as opposed to vehicle miles traveled. We're a rural town, right? So everybody's going to the center of town for their commercial service. I mean, you can't walk to Home Depot, you can't walk to the hospital, you can't walk. I mean, I guess you can walk to the drugstore, but I mean, you can't, or supermarket. It's rare. It's rare. I mean,
That's the carve out that they've placed into the OPR guidelines to be specialized, to allow for specialized thresholds for rural communities, and that's what we've built here. Right, so I do a lot of work in Siskiyou County where the cities are really tiny and there's even less transit. And so, yeah, we have to do the same things and we try to carve those out. And that's where this comes in and actually helps you because of what BCAG has done, and you can rely on it.
yeah, I mean, I guess what we don't want to do is we don't want to put an extra burden on developers that we're trying to get in here to improve with extra, I'm not trying, EIR, they're expensive, they're costly, they're a waste of time. In a town like this, I really think so. Is this kind of segueing into their plan for this, 30 cents a mile trial that the governor's trying to do on people? Which, I mean, in a town like this, that's insanity.
No argument for me. I drove a Ford 250 diesel, trust me.
But I mean, I just
Mileage
really.
pricing.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. The end of the day, the concept was to encourage a more compact urban form, which should be every city's goal, rural or urban. You should put uses next to each other. You should have an efficient set of land uses because it's better for your residents, it's better for your long-term budget, and it's less expensive for the city to maintain.
Right, and I don't disagree. I think Orville's general plan is fairly cohesive, and I think there's a lot of thought put into it, looking at it. But I mean, it's still a rural town.
Absolutely.
You're not gonna have 4-story condos being built. Yet we're not there. You're not gonna have that 15-minute city that they desire. Yet they want higher density, but yet they want you to walk, right? We have a housing shortage. We need affordable housing. It just seems like they have these grandiose ideas for miles traveled, but they want to keep on stacking people on top of each other, but you don't have the infrastructure to do it. You don't have the public transportation. We don't have BART here. We don't need BART here, right? So, I don't know. So I guess what we're saying is that as long as this is within our general plan, we don't have to do anything outside of the normal CEQA if it's required, correct?
And it also kind of sounds like, when I was reading through the list of things that you could do to comply, it's so blurry that there does seem like there's a lot of options. I don't know
Yes.
if I read that wrong, but it felt like simple options, like a bike rack.
Yes.
So it seems like if developers knew that ahead of time, if they were in a white area, and I'm also hoping that it can go to staff to figure out simply and help just add a couple more little simple things and basically still keep the autonomy here to attract the development we want.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because adding a bus stop or adding a sidewalk isn't always a simple thing,
No.
depending
But a
on,
bike
I mean,
rack.
depending on the project. And my question is just an overarching question. You've kind of led toward, I think, the answer to this is that, when we have somebody who wants to come in and do a good project that's going to build the community and bring jobs and is desirable, how much more of a burden are we bringing on the people who are going to invest in the community?
there shouldn't be any additional burden. In fact, by adopting this, you should be reducing the burden, because right now, they are all having to make up the answer on their own, do their own studies, work to make their own thresholds.
Okay.
With this, developers don't mind if they know ahead of time what they're required to do. So by taking uncertainty out of the process, you're actually making it easier for them to come in and do their thing. That's what we're trying to do. That's what this does. It clears it up and out the door.
Thank you.
There's two points that I would like to make. One is, as part of this analysis, Fair and Peers did a future VMT analysis as to what the city would need in 2040, was it 2030?
2040.
2040. And the conclusion was that they only need some minor intersection improvements along Highway 70. So there's no particular dramatic things we have to do for the next 20 years for VMT mitigation otherwise. The second point is that on Feather Ranch, you remember the Feather Ranch subdivision, that did trigger an EIR. VMT was one of the significant impacts that the city council did an overriding considerations on. However, that itself did not trigger the EIR. The EIR was triggered because it required a general plan amendment, that there were wetlands, that there was it was under the airport flyway. And so there were a number of reasons why we needed to have that EIR that was triggered. So, but VMT was just one of them. And now with the interim threshold, we may be able to justify VMT for the next project that comes along, the next big project that comes along. I don't know if I'm misspeaking at all, Mark.
No, not all, Wes. You categorized. I mean, if that ranch was consistent with your general plan, you could, and these were adopted, you could probably have exempted it.
Yeah, potentially
Even
so.
with the wetlands, because there are standard procedures that are applied to all projects with wetlands. So now you also get, and I want you to be aware of this, there are developers, because of the investment that goes into it, that want an EIR. It is the platinum standard. And if they think anyone's going to throw rocks at their projects, they want that EIR. But that's a different discussion.
So I might suggest to staff that when this goes in front of city council, and I know they're going to try and look at this and have probably 3 times the reaction that we're going to have on the planning commission, that we're going to probably want somebody like the gentleman here to make the presentation to them.
We've already seeded that idea.
Okay. I'm crossing my T's.
Absolutely. Wes asked me, he says, well, do you want to do Zoom or do you want to be there? I said, I think I need to be in the room.
Yeah.
And I'll do the same with the council. I just have to schedule, because I've got other meetings that I have to attend as well.
This is what I'm learning. I've been here for 2.5 years now.
Zoom is helpful if you just want information, right? You can call a consultant anywhere in the world and get that information. But when you have questions and there's interaction, nothing beats being here. And I'm close enough.
So I mean, basically, if it's considered a general plan, I mean, we've already taken it into consideration when they've done the general plan, right? So I mean, if it's zoned high density, we pretty much know vehicle miles traveled or what'd you call it? What's the other one? Level of service.
Level of service? Yes.
I mean, it's baked into the cake, it seems to me. So
You are going to be the best advocate for a 15183 analysis of future projects. Absolutely.
Even if it's in the white.
Even if it's in the white zone. All that means in the white zone is you may have to take a closer look at it. That's all. In the green zone, it's assumed. In the white zone, you have to make a little effort to show it there. Right. And to your point, Warren, it'd be great to revise this at some point over time if money falls from the sky and see how much more of this we can make green. This will happen over time as the data is updated and people move and things get built. But this is what we have for right now.
Yeah, that's just why I think that was the source of my questions in the last meeting was that, as somebody who deals with community data at a very small level, I didn't see the pattern between the areas that had enough data for analysis and those that don't. So it seems like there's a way for us to bring in. I wanted to see where the data comes from, and all I could ever end up finding was the results of an analysis. I couldn't find anything on inputs, but yeah. But if it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference between being in a white and a green area, then it's not going to be worth the effort to try and.
I wouldn't spend a lot. I think there's other things you might want to spend money on first.
I'd do it for free.
Oh, well, if we get you the data.
It's just my time,
If we get you the data, Warren, you more than knock yourself out. I can get Ron to get that to you. Any other questions of me?
We're open for a motion.
Okay, so we're voting to adopt this.
Change to our general plan. Change the word maintain to strive. That's basically what this is.
It'll be item 3, so if that's what you're looking for.
What page is that on?
Page 3. If you, of the agenda.
Page 101 of your entire staff report. The new policy would be policy 2.5, to reduce the total vehicle miles traveled through designation of land uses that support multimodal travel and provision of more direct routes to high activity locations. That would be the new addition to the general plan transportation element.
How does this affect us because Caltrans owns, don't they own Oro Dam or part of it, isn't it? Because we have Oro Dam and Olive Highway, right? So.
They own both.
Yeah, so how does that affect our decision-making? Are they going to come back and want something additional because they own those
Potentially,
roads?
we have it in our city codes that if there is a project within a half a mile of a state highway, we have to consult with Caltrans, and they tend to be more trigger happy in terms of requiring analysis. So we just have to deal with that. Was that your question?
Now, in the recommendation, there's 2 resolutions that are pending here. I take it the one resolution looks like it's the adoption of the changes to the general plan, the circulation element of the general plan. The second one has to do with the EIR amendment or addendum.
Establishing the interim thresholds, yes.
Okay. I will so move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Please open voting.
Maybe you're on the other one next.
There you go.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you for the presentation. It cleared things
Yeah.
up a lot.
I'm so glad. Thank you so much for moving up the agenda.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate
It's
it.
nice to know we can just call in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, you get to hear the last hour of the debate.
Or you could stick around and hear about the tree ordinance.
Do you think this 30 cents a mile nonsense ever has the chance of seeing the light of day? It's probably.
I don't know about 30 cents a mile. I will tell you, whenever somebody wants to monitor your data, they're eventually going to charge you for it. So I think it's an invasion of my privacy if somebody wants to monitor.
But it's just crazy that they're even suggesting or even doing a trial of that. Yeah. Yeah, it'll never work.
You're never lying.
Connor, or are we gonna go back to one?
Which would be best for staff? 2, 1?
We probably should take care of the use permit one first. That's probably the quicker.
Okay, yeah, if,
Is that-
item 1,
Is this the Dr. Wu?
In the grid.
Good evening, Commissioners. So tonight is use permit 2407. It is for a outpatient services, which is a medical facility. It is going to be located at 1440 Lincoln Street, which is just about a block and a half north of City Hall. Can you go ahead and... There we go. So it is right smack between two parking lots that belong to the Butte County Office of Education and the Butte County Historical Society, and fronts on Lincoln Street. Next, please. So it is an existing building. It's the Griggs Building, which is a little over 100 years old. It is a historic structure. The applicant's primary medical services are to provide services to vets, and he contracts through the VA and a few other departments. And so his primary is to serve disabled vets. He thought he was going through the process correctly, and he hired contractors to build a handicap ramp for his veterans. Unfortunately, they did not pull permits with us, and they did not build that ramp that you see in this photo to city code, building codes. It is not an ADA accessible ramp. The doctor is, however, working with community development staff. In fact, he's hired a new contractor that's local and knows our rules. And the contractor and the building inspector went out there today to make sure that they've got a game plan going forward. So there is a condition of approval that he has to continue working with community development staff, both planning and building, just to make sure that everything is done correctly and is brought into compliance. So that view will be changing slightly. Next slide. Okay, so staff does feel that as determined, as conditioned, that especially with the one about him continuing to work with community development, that this is a good use for this area. And that we have findings in the staff report on page 7 and 8 to support this. And so there are 4 recommended motions. The first is to hold a public hearing. The second is to adopt the notice of exemption. And 3 and 4 is to approve the use permit and the associated resolution. And that is my staff report. I can answer any questions. I will say that the doctor had planned on being here today. He was here this morning with his contractor. However, he had a medical emergency, had to go back to Monterey where he has another clinic, and he's there now. He did email me a letter that I have put in front of your packets. It's in green, and that was what he wanted to be here to say tonight to you guys. So,
Thanks. That ramp looked fairly nice. Being in the historic downtown overlay, are they going to do something still sleek, or are they going to do a big, more concrete?
No, it's he is fully aware that he's in the DHO overlay and has design standards, and we want to make sure that the building is accurately represented.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that's one of the conditions of the permit too.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I just have one question. I'm sorry if I missed this, if it was in the staff report, but I was curious, what triggered the use permit for this project?
When he originally submitted an application, he had a business statement, letter of intent in there, and it listed all the services that he wanted to provide. And it aligns with the land use called outpatient services. He can do minor surgeries there, but he has no overnight stay. He has no major surgeries. If he does anything considered a surgery, it's done without general anesthesia. I always say this word wrong. He doesn't have to put them under. And so that is considered outpatient services, which requires a use permit.
Okay, so because I think that came up on another project that we had. Is that on all of our all of our mixed-use zones that medical services requires a use permit?
I want to say yes, but I would have to double check to be sure.
Doctors' offices, dentists' offices, other types of medical service do not trigger a use permit. If you do outpatient services, that's a level that triggers the use permit.
Okay.
We did have a similar, though, over behind KFC. We had
It was on Oro Dam, it was in the
Yeah.
MXC zone. Yeah.
How come it requires a use, why does it trigger that? Is that that's just in our city code? And why?
Yes, and
what's the
it's a level of, we'll call it invasive surgery, that is a higher level than what a dentist or a medical doctor would do, a general practitioner would do.
I think our question is, we're not sure why those activities wouldn't be permitted in those zones, but I suppose those were probably conversations that happened during the development of the general plan, which I don't know if any of us around here were privy to, so.
We can check to find out the genesis of that and to see if there is in fact a corresponding state requirement that authorizes us to do that.
Because it seemed to me it was a law office before, and now it's a medical. To me, it just seems like a perfect use.
Yeah.
That would,
Did I read?
he might live upstairs, yeah.
So yes, it is. It is the medical facility on the first floor and his residence on the second floor.
Which is great. Because that's that great thing about mixed use.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can live behind and above.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah,
Talk about reducing VMT right there.
exactly.
Into your level of service or
No,
your-
VMT.
Your VMT,
We're not
yeah.
doing the level
We
of
thought we'd bring you a
service.
really good example of how that
It's a
could work.
really good example.
Segue right
And it
into that.
said you had urgent care listed on your slide, I think. Was that part of it too?
Madam Clerk, would you please?
Or is that,
He will do urgent care for veterans.
okay, not for neighbors?
No, so
Okay.
he will take private insurance by appointment only.
Oh, okay.
But because he has another practice in Monterey, he's going to be splitting his time between the two.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. I thought that would be a wonderful
a
place
haul.
for an urgent care.
The specific
close.
title I have here, Hercules Medical and Urgent Care Facility, is what his sign is going to say. So
Okay.
also, I was going to save this for later, but you will be seeing him probably next month for the sign.
Oh, wonderful.
Because he wants to have it internally illuminated, it has to go before the Historic Advisory Committee.
Now, that one I understand.
Yes. So we haven't gotten that far with him right now because we're really focusing on making sure that ramp is safe and accessible. I thought it went off for a second. So that's going to be
Okay.
next month.
It's great.
Commissioners, this is Connor. I just wanted to weigh in real quick on your outpatient discussion since urgent care was mentioned, but that's kind of precisely why outpatient services requires the use permit. Is we don't specifically define urgent care, but urgent care facilities, take for example Dove's Landing, that is an outpatient care facility that also provides minor invasive surgeries, so plastic surgery, things that don't require you to stay overnight for recoveries. Our code does provide a secondary definition of professional office, which includes doctors, dentists, and individuals licensed by the state who don't have those more high traffic, more invasive procedures. So if I were to go to my primary care physician, they're probably just in a professional office setting. But if I need to go in and also have the facility open for urgent care, for general walk-ins and things like that, generally higher traffic, more intense use, which would be subject to your guys' discretion.
Thank you, Connor.
Speaking of more of a historical advisory committee, is that a building you've been in before?
Oh,
or
yeah. No, I looked at it. It's great inside.
Is it historic still on the interior?
inside, but the outside, it used to be unbelievably beautiful Victorian. You could see the picture in the Eamon home.
And that's what I'm speaking about. That
And
'cause
now they've really-
the DA kind of ruined the Eamon home, the interior of the Eamon home when they were in it.
Oh, this one's nice.
I
mean,
just,
they
I just
did-
don't.
they
Wouldn't,
did
I'd
do
hate to
this
see a business
ceiling, but
move in and gut the interior of.
They didn't get everything,
Well, it's
but they
I mean,
did change the
Yeah,
entry.
it was our attorney's office. It
Yeah,
looked just like a
Yeah.
you know, attorney's office.
They ruined the outside, is what happened. It's not. It was a stunning, but still, it's a great building. And I'm super thrilled that someone's there.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
And he has started remodeling the inside. He has permits there that we have reviewed. They didn't need building permits to get. So he's painted. He's added new fixtures.
Yes.
But the doors are still the original doors. The handles are still the original handles. It's actually quite charming.
It is.
Do we know who the previous contractor was?
He has not revealed that to us, but my understanding is it was one of his clients that he works with, and that he.
Not local.
No. So this time he did go with someone local.
Did you penalize him for lack of permits?
We did not, because he has been very straightforward with us, and I've spent significant amount of time with him, and there is a little bit of a language barrier, and sometimes I think we're speaking not only just different languages but different bodies of experience, right? He doesn't know anything about city government, and I don't know anything about medical stuff, and so he thought he had hired someone who was doing everything right, and so I'm not going to penalize him for that, because he's really working with us to correct everything.
Quite
Yeah,
honestly,
thank
he
you
is-
for not penalizing him.
He is being
That's
sort of, in
wonderful.
some way penalized because he's got to tear a
Yeah.
lot of, it's a
Yeah.
lot
He
of.
noticed it was my husband and I walking by. We're like, that is not to code.
No, and
You
it's
cannot get
not
a wheelchair around that.
Right,
We
that's
were
exactly
looking
right.
like there's
The-
no way.
Doesn't have the landing at that turn, and
No,
the
I
The
wasn't
slope
quite
is
sure
wrong.
bit
The
off.
landing
What
is
was
wrong.
happening
There's
with
not
that.
a wheel stop. The handrails aren't correct.
I noticed all that.
Yeah, and I honestly think that people have been helping themselves to pieces of the ramp, because slowly but surely some of the railings they installed are every time I go out there, it seems like it's missing something.
Really, we probably should tell him so that they can
He-
install it
he-
differently next time.
Yeah, he's fully aware.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
But the length of what it is not adequate for the height that it has,
Right.
that has to be. So it's
Absolutely.
probably going to have to wrap around, come back along itself to get to is it the north side or the south side?
So he has a sidewalk running the south side of the property, which when you're looking at it is the left side. And that sidewalk is where he is intended to eventually have, if someone's parked in the back to use the handicap spots, come forward. So the ramp has to be moved to the side. It's not considered accessible if they have to leave one to get on the other.
But the staff is working with him to try to figure out the best and easiest way for him to be in compliance with ADA.
Great.
That's also aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, he's exploring a couple of things. One is, maybe he could put it in the back behind the building and then have the path, like he'll have to expand the sidewalk on that side. But another one is that he may try to get an agreement with the neighbor to be able to use that parking lot, and then he'd be able to come straight over from there. There's some variables, and as Christina said, he's working with us to try to figure out the best way to do it. He's been really nice about it, and we're trying to figure out the easiest way to get him to what he needs without, being too burdensome.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably spent a lot of money on that.
Well, hopefully he didn't, but probably he did. Yeah, whatever it was too much for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Butte County Office of Education has 2 handicap spots on the southern side, and they have said he could use it. One of our conditions of approval is that if he chooses to use those spots versus paving handicap stripe in the back, he has to get a written shared parking agreement versus just a verbal.
Thank you. We're open for a motion.
First motion.
Item 1.
I make a motion to approve item 1 as agenda size.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Please open voting.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we go to the.
And
one.
Connor is here, so we could move to item 2.
Alright, this is me. Here we are, tree permit.
Again,
Again. Have we seen this before? Yes. So we are back. We want to have another workshop discussion with the Planning Commission, especially some changes have occurred since the last time that you guys have seen this ordinance. City Council has looked at it twice. Both times they've requested revisions that we've gone to them. So after the most recent time, we've decided let's take it back to the Planning Commission, have a discussion on this one, see if we can get a course of action going. So I have a little presentation for you guys today. Let me pull it up. Here we are. So, tree permits. We've seen this, but a quick recap. 2009, our general plans adopted. We set ourselves some new goals, policies, and actions. The general plan is required to be consistent with the city's zoning code, vice versa. So the new general plan triggers the need to update the zoning code. The city received grant funding through Proposition 84, which is what the Oroville Sustainable Code updates were born between 2012 and 2015. As part of those Sustainable Code updates, we saw the creation of the mixed-use zoning, expanded design guidelines, but also a climate action plan that directed the creation of a local oak tree ordinance. Those 2015 Sustainable Code updates were adopted and the oak tree ordinance was codified. So how did we get to where we are today? I began this in November of 2022. It started before me, so it's been going on for a few years now, but we held our first Planning Commission workshop in September of 23. You guys saw this, requested some changes, increased exceptions and fire safety requirements, things like that. So we returned in October of 2023, got your seal of approval, went to City Council in January, where Council conducted a public hearing and requested some revisions. Those revisions included the mayor wanted to see a list of specific tree species that were exempt from permit requirements, and a little bit more leeway for other trees. So we returned in March of 2024, and additional changes were requested. Council was concerned it didn't go far enough, that there weren't enough exceptions, that we made it more difficult, things like that. So we're here, June 2024, with you guys. So wait, what about trees? Well, we have 3 primary sections within the municipal code that pertain to trees and their removals and preservation. 17.12.060 tree preservation, 17.12.065 oak tree loss mitigation, and 17.48.070 tree removal permits. All 3 of these code sections are intended to work in close coordination with one another. Tree preservation and tree removal permits have been a part of the Oroville zoning code for forever, for quite some time. I cannot find a version where we didn't require tree removal permits. But first, let's go over some key definitions. Heritage trees, trees that are at least 24 inches at diameter breast height. What's diameter? It's the length of a line through the center of a circle. How do you get diameter? You calculate it through circumference, which is the distance around a circle. So what do these mean for me? When determining how large a tree to protect, a city can choose to either use diameter or circumference. In the case of Oroville, we decided to use diameter at breast height, which is an industry standard in the tree world. So again, how do you calculate that? D is diameter, which equals circumference divided by pi. Circumference is measured at 54 inches above grade around the trunk of a tree. How big is that? Let's watch a little video on how to calculate diameter at breast height. So this is from Portland. This tree in the video is the closest I could find to a 24-inch DBH tree.
This video will teach you how to accurately measure a tree using common household equipment. You will need a measuring tape, a thumbtack, some string, a marker, and a calculator. The standard way to measure a tree is diameter at breast height, or DBH. DBH refers to the diameter or cross-section of a tree at 4.5 feet above the ground. To find DBH, first measure 4.5 feet up the trunk from the ground and mark that height with your thumbtack. Then take your string and secure one end to the tree with a thumbtack at 4.5 feet. Wrap the string around the tree, making sure it remains tight and even all the way around. Pull the string tight and mark where it overlaps. Now measure the string between your marks to determine the circumference of the tree. This tree has a circumference of 84 inches. To get DBH, however, we want the diameter of the tree, so we must divide the circumference by pi. Using your calculator, divide the circumference by 3.14 and round to the nearest whole number. This tree has a DBH of 27 inches. Voila! But what?
So that's how you determine DBH. This is an example of a preserved tree. You can see it's probably similar to maybe around a 24-inch DBH tree. This is outside of my parents' house. You can see they landscaped around it. The tree has been preserved. It's a pretty large tree. So what actually is changing? We are allowing for greater flexibility for property owners. We are reducing the oak tree mitigation from 2 inches for every 1 inch to 1 for 1. And we're adding exceptions to permit requirements where there are absolutely none now. So how are we allowing for greater flexibility? Well, the current code requires that if you were to cut down an oak tree, you must replace the oak tree within 90 days. What does that mean? Well, if I cut down the tree right in the beginning of the year, I would have to plant the tree in the dead heat of summer. The tree's probably going to die. That's not going to be the best. So we have left that up to the permit process, which would either be the Director of Public Works, the zoning administrator, or the Planning Commission to work with the applicants to determine when the best suitable time is to replant the tree. Reducing the oak tree mitigation from 2 to 1, from 2 to 1 to 1 to 1. Essentially right now, if you cut down an oak tree, you must plant 2 inches for every 1 inch removed. So 100 inches must be planted. If you remove 50 inches, we're changing that to be a 1 for 1 ratio. What that means is there will be a no net loss of inches of oak tree. And we're also adding exceptions to permit requirements where there are none now. Currently, if you want to cut down a tree that is 24 inches or larger, any tree, you must receive a permit from the city, no exceptions. It does not matter if that tree is dead, dying, poses a risk, hazard, anything. You must get a permit from the city. We are now proposing to add 8 exceptions that would apply to all trees, both oak and non-oak. How does CEQA feel? Well, CEQA does not specifically single out the removal of individual trees per se. It ultimately depends on the circumstances as a whole. You guys heard earlier with the VMT discussion, if it is consistent with the general plan and zoning code, there's no really need for additional CEQA unless circumstances warrant that. Our general plan sets forth requirements for oak tree mitigation within our zoning code. Our zoning code implements that. Our general plan has a master EIR that analyzes these things. Therefore, we need to have this. In 2015, the 6th District Court of Appeals published an opinion in Save Our Big Trees versus City of Santa Cruz that the city failed to carry its burden to show that substantial evidence supported their tree code amendments were exempt from CEQA. The proposed code amendments pertain to changing the restrictions for removing non-native invasive trees and permitting removal of a heritage tree under certain circumstances. Sounds awfully familiar because that's exactly what we're doing. We are pushing this through with the CEQA exemption, which is why I would encourage you and everyone to err on the side of caution when going about discussing this ordinance. So, true versus false. Under the current regulations, I can remove any tree I want. That is false. Under the current regulations, you must obtain a permit to remove a tree over 24 inches DBH. If you have a tree that is not an oak tree, that is less than 24 inches DBH, you are free to cut that down however you please. If the tree is over 24 inches DBH, you must receive a permit from the city. As previously mentioned, currently, if that tree is dead, dying, poses a risk to your home, is necessary to be removed for fire safety, because your homeowner's concern says it needs to be removed, you must still get a permit from that. We are trying to change that under the proposed ordinance to allow you to be exempt from permit requirements. I have to get a permit to remove an oak tree? Yeah, you do. Under both the current and proposed regulations, the removal of an oak tree over 6 inches DBH requires a permit, with 8 new exceptions where permits are not required. Again, those are applicable to both oak trees and non-oak trees. the city won't allow me to maintain my trees without first getting a permit. That is false. Under both the current and proposed regulations, routine maintenance and pruning does not require a permit. We want you to maintain your property. We want you to maintain your trees. If your tree is in the public right-of-way, meaning it's in a planting strip, there may be additional requirements there, but you do not need to receive a permit to maintain, trim, prune a tree on your property. How about a voluntary tree protection program? We have one. A property owner is eligible to apply for a landmark designation in accordance with 17.48.040. We have no locally protected trees designated as a landmark. No one has ever applied for it. No one has ever inquired to apply for it. The city of Chico, who has had their program since 2010, has 6 trees on their heritage landmark program. All 6 of those are either on public property or in the street. So the city applied to protect their own trees. Do we have any questions?
The other exemption that I didn't hear you say, but I know it's on here. Basically, if you're on a developed lot that's smaller than 20,000 square feet, you're exempt also from a permit?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So you have that handy table now that I created to help show what we're changing and explaining how we're changing it. One of those exceptions is kind of a blanket exception. If for some reason none of these other things apply to you and you are a developed single family home on a 20,000 square foot or smaller lot, you can remove the tree without the need for a permit.
Larger.
What about, when insurance makes you remove a tree? Connor?
Yes.
What about when insurance, you know, say the homeowner doesn't want to remove their
They don't do
tree,
that anymore, though.
but insurance makes them, you know, under the fire hardening and all these new rules, they say you have to remove a tree.
They just
Are we gonna make them get a permit, although they don't want to do it, pay for a permit and then replant a tree, although
Nope.
forced to do it?
Nope, they do not have to receive a permit. So under the proposed regulations, exception number 5, if the removal is determined as necessary by the property owner's insurance provider in order to maintain homeowner's insurance coverage, would not require a permit.
Perfect. That was all mine.
I know you did a good job, Connor. You really explained it well. But I did see the letter in here that Taylor wrote to Warren.
Yes?
So I don't know if you have that also, Connor?
Yes.
Okay, and so that did make really good sense to me. That if a 6-inch oak tree is removed, that's 6 15-gallon trees. I didn't really think about that a 15-gallon tree is just a 1-inch replacement. So what is the theory, or is the thought that half of them are going to die, or all of them are going to die but one, because you're ending up with more oak trees?
Generally, yes. So oftentimes when you're planting something, it isn't going to last. Through our mitigation requirements, they are required to monitor those for a period, I believe it's 5 years, to ensure that they survive. Anything that dies, they need to replace. After that 5-year mitigation monitoring period, if it dies, there's really no legal obligation to replace that dead tree. Right now, it is, I understand what the Fire Safe Council is saying. It's hard because we can't require less mitigation than what's currently there. So if you were to remove 50 inches of trees, we can't state, okay, you can replant 25, because you are still experiencing a degradation of that. We do have our 1999 CEQA guidelines that the city has adopted. That sets forth our benchmarks of determining what is significant, how we determine a significant oak woodland, which is even more convoluted than the ordinance, but it's an acre or larger with canopy coverage of 20%, or if it's smaller than 20% canopy coverage, that's 50%. How do you determine that? I don't have a way to determine that, but what it does talk about is it does require a preservation of like for like. So you remove 6 inches, you need to replace 6 inches. So we're trying to maintain consistency with that.
Isn't it also because if you had removed a 15-inch tree, would cost a lot more money to replace it with a 15-inch tree rather than 15 one-inch trees. So it's also an economic thing, I think, as well.
Yes, but I
Yeah.
planted a lot of trees and they all grow really big. So ultimately, you're going to have a lot more trees if people are responsible and take care of their trees and they make it past a certain point.
Yeah, and so we ran into this problem with the Ruddy Creek subdivision. They had analyzed that, and based on our current regulations of 2-for-1, they were required to replant somewhere in the couple hundreds of inches of oak tree, which was more than what was currently on that property. Staff were reasonable in understanding, like, this site is being developed with 97 homes. You can only fit so many trees on this property. The property owner can work out either on-site replacement, off-site replacement, or payment of that in lieu fee. So in the case of the Ruddy Creek subdivision, we worked with them to maximize the amount feasible that can be replanted on-site, which I think came out to somewhere like 150 inches of oak tree, and then pay an in lieu fee to cover the rest of that. So there are options to work with the property owners to figure out how best to go about mitigating these things.
Yeah, because I can see you're trying to do a development and now all of a sudden you took down one 6-inch tree and now you have to put up 6 more. And that seems like a hard thing. Okay, so for the in lieu fee, so you pay the in lieu fee and then people can actually call the city and ask to have a tree planted on their property if they want it? Is that where the money goes?
Where they pay, well, no, it could go anywhere. It could go in a park. It would go into a fund, and then basically Wade decides at some point where a tree is needed, and then he pulls money from that fund to plant trees.
Okay, so it just funds generally.
Correct, yes.
Okay,
So
that's
it
good.
would have to be set aside into a specific oak tree mitigation fund. And that fund would be utilized for the preservation, planting of oak trees. If it was feasible to plant them in as street trees, then I'm sure maybe a property owner could request, hey, I want an oak tree planted in the planting strip in front of my house. Well, we can withdraw from the oak tree fund to plant those.
Connor, can you explain the distinction between live oak and the other oak species, interior live oak, why we are exempting that one?
Yes. So interior live oak was requested to be exempted from that requirements because apparently they grow really fast and they like to take over the areas, and when they're younger, they tend to be like a ladder fuel for fire issues. So by exempting those, we are still preserving the larger, older growth live oak, interior live oak, but it's those younger 6-inch DBH ones that tend to pose a problem. So if an owner of a property, and I think this was the case with the Ruddy Creek subdivision, that was a orchard, and a lot of voluntary live oaks took hold and created the need for that extremely high mitigation. Staff and Planning Commission at their first meeting felt it would be best to exempt those to help property owners out with their property maintenance.
In the end, on the Ruddy Creek subdivision, the city council approved a reduced mitigation fee for that because of the circumstances that Connor just described, that they were volunteer trees and such. Connor, can you describe the foothill overlay and when you need a tree permit there or not?
Yes, so the foothill overlay was added in with those sustainability code updates, and essentially that targeted the eastern area of the city, roughly around Foothill Boulevard or Quincy Highway. It's at the face of the horse of the city limits, and so that area is area that has been determined to contain essentially oak woodlands. It contains blue oaks, valley oaks, gray pines, things that are very typical in a foothill setting. So what comes with that is you tend to have fire issues. And as Commissioner Warren mentioned, there's quite a bit of properties that are overgrown. They have deferred, maintenance. They need to remove trees. How can we go about making it easier for those property owners in the foothill overlay. So we've tried to do that. They are exempted under certain circumstances where their property is developed. It still meets those same size regulations, the 20,000 square feet or smaller. If they want to remove a oak tree, or any tree in general, actually, sorry, they want to remove a tree, it needs to be located outside of a setback area that abuts a street. So typically that would be your front yard setback, which in R1 and RL zones is 15 to 20 feet. In that front area, if you wanted to remove something, you would have to get a permit. If it's outside that area, you wouldn't have to get a permit. Why did we do that? Well, the intent of the foothill overlay is to maintain an image of a foothill ecosystem. If we were to allow all property owners within the foothill overlay to just clear cut their properties, the intent of the foothill overlay is not there anymore. So we're trying to strike a balance between the two things here. And I did have a slide as an example here. I believe I showed it last time. I can't quite recall, but essentially it is a highlighted example of what the foothill overlay permitting requirements would be. Pardon as my computer freezes on me. Well, now I'm frozen.
Connor, after this, would you send us a copy of your slideshow?
Gladly will.
Thank you.
But essentially, the intent was to maintain the appearance of a foothill ecosystem. So in the front yard, you drive down the street, you can see that there are trees that look like you are in the foothills, but in the backyard, you can cut away.
But you can still cut trees near the road if they, if it is consistent with the fire safe landscape maintenance guidelines.
Of course. Of course. So that last exemption 8, covering developed properties, is kind of a catch-all. If you, for some reason, do not fit within 1 through 7 exemptions, and you have a property that's developed, there you go. But the reason, and why 20,000 square feet? Well, 20,000 square feet is pretty large. It's not overly large, but as I mentioned, our CEQA guidelines do call out significant canopy coverage is 20% on a site that is 1 acre or more. If it's 1 acre or less, significant canopy coverage is 50%. That's quite a high benchmark.
There was a case in 2008, Oro Garden Ranch, which was out east of town, I believe in the foothill overlay as well, where proponent wanted to put a subdivision in, and there was a significant oak woodland canopy on that parcel. The staff was before our time, but the staff worked closely with the applicant and allowed a dense development which preserved as many oak trees as possible. And so there were substandard lots and a whole bunch of other exceptions that were made in order to preserve those trees. So that is an example of working out an oak woodland mitigation project.
Even, I looked at the Butte Woods subdivision. We know that's in the foothill overlay. It's in an oak woodland right there. That subdivision was pre-oak tree ordinance from the city. They did a 41-page oak tree nexus study, which found a significant canopy coverage. I think it was somewhere around some odd 400, I don't want to say 400%, but there was some 400 inches of oak trees, and it had to analyze the percent canopy coverage there with the percent canopy coverage through the rest of the city and what a fair share equivalent mitigation would be. That's a very onerous thing to do for a developer. You're going to have them go out, hire this individual company to do a survey, to tell them where they have to mitigate it, how it's going to go, how much fees they're going to have to pay. By way of having our oak tree mitigation ordinance, we've set those standards. If an individual were to come in and want to develop a property, we review it against the oak tree ordinance. That's required by CEQA. We look against local protected ordinances. If we were to not do that, it would default back to the state. Well, what does the state have? It has the Oak Conservation Woodlands Act of 2001. That is applicable to counties. It also does cover canopy coverage. So if we're not doing the inch replacement, we're looking at a canopy coverage calculation. It has not been adopted in legislation, but it's currently working its way through the legislature. They are looking at adding new requirements to our general plan conservation element that would require the city to analyze conservation wildlife corridor areas. So where we're looking at in the foothill overlay, we'd have to analyze canopy coverage to determine where a significant area of wildlife activity may be and how we can maintain connectivity between wildlife areas. That may or may not be coming down the pipeline. It's working its way through. I think just last couple days they voted to send it back to committee, but we're in a 2-year legislative cycle. It may come up and it has a timeline of by 2028. So what we're doing here today may ultimately become null and void, but we're trying to make it easier while we can.
Thank you.
So, so what,
We would do a recommendation.
can we ask more questions?
Yeah.
So, you'll have to pardon me, this is become a really extensive document here. Under what scenarios would these replacement, tree replacement or mitigation fund trigger?
For paying into it?
Or they're either for the mitigation, either replacement or paying into the fund. When does that trigger?
The person gets the choice.
Yeah, the person gets to choose what's best suited for their scenario. If they don't want to plant trees and deal with the 5-year monitoring, they would just pay.
What triggers that though?
If you are moving an oak tree that's 6 inches or greater.
Anytime, anyone who does.
Correct.
On a lot over 20,000, right?
Well, anything that isn't exempt.
Anything that's not
Okay.
exempt.
That's not exempt,
Complicated list
okay.
of exemptions,
Okay.
yeah.
Correct. So we're looking at a in and in. So scenario A with subnote. So I want to move an oak tree. What's the size? Is it 6 inches or greater? Yes. Okay. Do you fall under one of these exceptions? No. Okay. You must pay into this fee. If you are a developer looking to develop in the case of the Ready Creek subdivision, you're not going to be able to seek one of these exceptions because you are doing a project that is a discretionary action under CEQA, which requires us to analyze that. We can't just exempt you from everything under that case. So what we saw with Ready Creek would still apply, but we are reducing the mitigation requirements in that scenario. So if another developer who is in a scenario like Ready Creek, they will not have to replace them at a 2-for-1 ratio. It will now be a 1-for-1 ratio. We'll also have a fee set up for the in-lieu mitigation. Currently, we don't have a fee for an in-lieu mitigation because we never studied that in the fee study. We've worked with Wade, our arborist, and he suggested, I think it was $223 in-lieu fee. That covers the man hours, the materials to purchase the tree, a miscellaneous irrigation, things like that. So we're trying to get to that point where we're ready for the next project.
So if I have a dead tree on my property, it's behind my house, it's definitely greater than 24 dBH, 24 inches dBH, am I going to need a permit to remove it?
Under the current ordinance, yes. Under the proposed ordinance, no. You will not need to have a permit for that. If your tree is dead, dying, or in poor health, you are exempt from permitting requirements.
Oh, this one is just if the tree is damaged but not dead. Right, I'm looking at exemption 1.
Yes, damaged. If you look at, where are we
It's
at?
definitely damaged. That
Number
I
7,
think
removal of a tree that is.
The order of these changing would really help with the understanding.
Well, we did add a couple after the fact, so it was in good order, and then we added like 5 more.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that it's behind my property, I'm in the foothill overlay.
Mhm.
If it's
Yeah,
behind
so
my
number
property,
7, if your tree's dead, dying, or in poor health, in poor health as determined by an arborist, I don't think you need a certified arborist to
then can we
determine if
strike
it's
all of
dead.
that? There's a lot of language in here that requires a bunch of determination by people that probably don't need to be involved. So, like determined by a certified arborist.
Well, we need
That's
the
just
certified, so that case is, if your tree's dead, it's pretty visible dead, I don't think you need a certified arborist. But if your tree is in poor health, you would need a certified arborist to determine that. So I'll move back to the Ruddy Creek case. There were 2 trees that were 24 inches or greater that met the classification of a heritage tree. If you look at those trees from the plain eye, we went out to the site. I remember Don, Wes, me, and Matt, we all went out there and we looked at the site and we saw these big trees. I thought they looked perfectly fine. Wade, who is our certified arborist, went out and actually looked at the trunk of the tree, found it to be splitting and coming apart, and determined that they were in poor health and would not require mitigation. So from the plain eye of, me, I don't know what a poor health tree looks like. But if a certified arborist goes out there, they can go ahead and confirm that. Is there a price to pay? Yes. Is it a small price to pay to not have to come in and get a permit and mitigate that? Sure. Some trade-offs.
In another case recently, the Lincoln Street Affordable Apartment Complex had a number of oak trees along the frontage along Lincoln, and those and some on the south side of that property. An arborist had to come in and do an oak tree analysis and make recommendations as to which trees were in poor health, which trees were in good health. Wade had to approve that, and certain trees were then allowed to be cut down, and certain trees are maintained. So that was a case that's not in the foothill overlay. I don't know what the new ordinance would do in that case. I'm assuming that it would be a similar process because there were large trees there.
Correct, yes. It would be a very similar process because, if you look at the table with the red lines in it, we're not doing a very drastic change. We're adding exceptions to the code. We're reducing the mitigation requirements down a little bit, but the same criteria, same grading requirements, same analysis. We've updated department heads. We don't have a parks and tree director. We have a public works director. It's the same as currently.
so when removal is necessary to meet fire safety guidelines, here it just says it determined to be necessary by fire department personnel. Can't we just change that to meet CAL FIRE guidelines that are very well published?
That's a pretty simple change that we'd be able to do. I've been operating under the assumption that
from a
the fire
user
department-
perspective, it would make it a lot more user friendly.
Yes. So from
Because here it says
my-
I got to call the fire department if I want to take a tree out for fire safety, which I shouldn't have to do if it's clearly in the guidelines.
So for my drafting of this to make it work was, I believe occasionally CAL FIRE does go out and they conduct their inspections for defensible space. They let people know you need to remove this pile of wood from next to your house, things like that. That's when fire department personnel would be out on your property. That checks off that box. The other thing is fire department personnel also draft those CAL FIRE defensible space guidelines. That is, in some cities, they have fuel modification zones. In this case, we have defensible space handouts. If you're following those handouts and you're not just clear cutting your property, but you're cutting your branches up to 6 feet to prevent the ladder fuels, you're removing the overhanging branches, that's in a pretty well-defined report that was written by fire personnel. But we can change that to just state.
Because that wouldn't be, that would, I wouldn't conclude that the way this was written, so. I just want to make it, what I want to do is I want to make this simpler and easier to use, and easier for the user to determine. I mean, I had attended the city council meeting in March where this was presented, and, their feedback to us is that it has to be simpler. It has to be easier to consume. And I think we're still kind of running into that issue.
My response to that is zoning code will never be easy to understand. I am training a planning aide and a planning intern in my other city. Our zoning code is a holdover from 1970s Orange County. I'm trying to explain.
Wait. You're in Lake Forest, right?
Correct, yes. So I'm trying to explain this has been a piecemeal zoning
Really different
code.
place in
together.
1970. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, so you have all these different things. What makes it easier, and what we have in Lake Forest and what Oroville should also have, is we have our convoluted zoning code that is broken down in applicant's guides for submitting. An applicant's guide for submitting a tree removal permit, an applicant's guide for submitting a use permit. The zoning code is intended for staff to understand the legal requirements and to convey those to the public in a way that they understand. If we as staff are not conveying that as someone comes into the public or in handouts, that's where we're failing. So
That is how it needs to be conveyed to the city council then when this comes up.
Yes, and so in the last city council meeting, it was mentioned the city of San Jose has really amazing information. Their code is easy to understand. What was easy to understand was their webpage pertaining to tree removal permits that had figures and handouts. Because the city of Oroville does not currently have a permit, does not currently have a fee, has put a hold on this current ordinance, we don't have any information on our website. We have a link under the Public Works Department for a tree removal permit that has been coming soon since the website was probably built. So once we get this ordinance adopted, just like with the alfresco dining ordinance, we can create those helpful handouts and the web pages for the public to understand and connect them to the resources they need. We're just not there yet.
Okay.
So
I tried to move it forward for you in March.
And I appreciate your help with that, Warren.
So here is a suggested rewording of number 4 on page 51. When removal is determined to be necessary by fire department personnel to comply with fuel modification requirements or to meet defensible space requirements as described in CAL FIRE guidelines.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
Or.
easier for you?
Simple enough change.
It'll be an or.
Yeah. We don't need the fire department to write a report every time we want to cut for fire safety. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you even heard about this, Connor. I mean, today we had a grass fire start over on
Long bar area.
Bar Road. Yeah, see the smoke from our front yard right over the ridge. Like, gosh, dang it! We just had another fire just a few days ago on the other side of us, and
It came at the worst time. I didn't want you guys to be all fired up and get rid of the ordinance here.
we're very fired up. Yes, especially those of us who live in the fire zone or trying. We want to maintain our properties for fire safety, not only for our own properties, but we also provide a buffer to the city when we do that. And so and I know this is going to be something beyond the tree ordinance, but I would definitely be interested in also pursuing some guidelines, especially for people in the foothill overlay, to further encourage or even codify fire safe landscape maintenance within our within properties in the city limits as we can. But I know that's another discussion, but very related to what we're talking about here. So.
Paradise is very strict.
So Connor, how did you learn about the Long Bar fire? You must
App?
have a
You have the
computer
app?
chip that gives you instant news of Oroville.
I know everything. I keep up to date. I keep up to date on everything that's going on up there. So I don't forget about you guys.
Questions?
I guess the question is, where are we? Because, I mean, what we have here in modifications is a vast improvement over the current code. I would love to see something get pushed so we can move forward, even if we do need to make further modifications to the tree ordinance later. We can do that later. I see a pressing need to just get these changes done.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're looking for, right? Us to recommend you take it back to city council.
Yes, I'm looking for you guys to give us the big voice that we need, that it's perfect. No, it's not. That it's good enough to move forward. We'll make that change.
It
for
is
the
vastly
fire.
superior to our current ordinance. How about that?
I'll be honest. It's really hard. It's hard to, and again, you know, you guys heard this. It's
Quote
easier
Commissioner
to
Jensen on that.
it's easier to attend in person and give these presentations. And I was fully banking on this being adopted, you know, January 2nd when I was back up there giving my presentation in person. But it's hard. City council is obviously a different beast. It's a different audience that's present. You know, I don't know if I can have the same conversations there that I do here, but when you have individuals who maybe didn't quite understand what we were doing, and are speaking up that we're making it harder, we can only respond to so much. So I'm hoping that this table, comparing what we're changing with the red lines and explaining next to the red lines what we're doing and why we're doing it, helps make it easier to understand that you can clearly see we're only touching the exceptions section. We're adding exceptions where there are no exceptions. We're reducing your mitigation requirements. Everything else, nothing to add, nothing to change. We're keeping it as is. So if this commission is happy with the one change as detailed by Wes, you know, we're just looking for your recommendation to move it back.
So should we try it again?
Yeah, I like this a lot better than it was. Do we
I take it you're looking for a motion to do this, or
a consensus to send it back?
it's just for receive press Oh, now I can't talk. Receive staff's presentation and provide direction. So
Just a consensus would be fine for me.
What does everybody think?
We like it.
Yeah?
council.
Send it back to
That's
council?
great. It's probably one of the best
It's hel-
ones in the area.
It's
in
helpful,
County,
Connor,
I
with
think.
the explanation about this being zoning code, that it's, that it, you know, that it's complicated, it kind of has to be complicated, but we will be making it simpler for the public by providing, we are committed as staff to providing guides for people to be able to follow, that they'll be able to see what they need to do in order to make sure they're not breaking ordinance, correct?
Correct.
Or converted to that, okay. All right.
I have what I thank you guys so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll move to commissioner reports. Historical advisory?
Well, I just have a question. I don't know if that can come in a commission report. And this is about the Bird Street School, which I do have a picture just to pass around of what it
I
used
saw
to
that.
look like.
Yeah,
Sorry,
beautiful,
just so you
beautiful.
guys can see. But there's a lot of work going on there, and I still can't remember the temporary buildings that are that they've added on. Are they allowed to have more? Like, I still want to be clear that we're not going to cover the entire play yard with those temporary buildings. So what are there rules about those in the historic district? I mean, I know we have the chambers
I
one.
don't think we know what they want to do yet. We know that they want to do something on the west side, that lot, that empty lot on the west side. Is that the school you're talking
The
about?
playground right on Bird?
Well, it's a vacant lot. Are we talking about the one that's across the street from the Catholic school?
Yes.
Yeah. So to
That's the playground. On a vacant lot.
on the
but
west
anyway.
side? Oh, it's just, it's a vacant 2-acre lot.
When Don was here, we did tour and discuss with them their desire to add those two portable buildings.
Yes.
And we told them that they needed to go to development review prior to erecting them. They did not do that. So we should tell them if they want to add any more structures like that, they do have to go to development review. They have.
I know I've seen at least two. I don't know if it was in here or development review come through, and they were supposed to match the other buildings. And then Natalie, I believe, said they've moved in two more.
They put them all together. There's actually 10.
They were
but
in,
it took 10 to make
in
two.
sections.
Yeah, they come in sections. They do not match the building that was built in the 70s that replaced that building. But
They do submit building permits for the awnings and the playground changes and things that they do there. But we just have to make sure that if they do anything else, that they get development review.
I mean, it's in the
projects.
heart of historic downtown, next to the beautiful St. Thomas Church. If there is any corner or lot that needs to be protected, I just want to make sure that it's on the books, and we just can't cover up that whole 2-acre section with those buildings, because that would just be a travesty. So I don't know.
That's the Head Start program, so
Are you
we'll
talking
go
about
ahead
this
and.
vacant lot right here next to the Head Start?
Yes,
I
Across
don't,
across
but it
Bird
looks,
Street?
Yeah, that was. I went.
It's more
I
like
went
a playground.
I went
Okay.
fourth
Even though
through
there's
sixth grade
no-
there, and it was always
it's right
part
in front
of
of
the school.
St. Thomas's. It was
Yeah.
part of the school.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it was always
Yeah.
part of Bird Street School. So I don't know why now all of a sudden it's just a vacant lot.
Oh, I see what you're
You
saying
know,
about the
it was,
playground.
it's
Yeah.
part of the school.
Yeah.
I know they're not running it as a normal school because that's not what they are. But I just don't know how can we make sure that our ordinances will not allow that to be completely destroyed?
we'll talk to them and get back to you on what the next steps are.
Okay. Thank you.
Staff reports.
Here's your picture.
Thank you.
We have a couple of things coming up. That 311 program, did we talk about that before? We put an RFP out for a 311. It's a customer records management program. You can have it on your phone, you can use it on your computer, you can call in.
Yes, for
And
residents.
so you see a pothole, you take a picture of it, you send it to the right department. Everything is clickable on their phone. It's really easy to use.
Love it.
If you see graffiti, a homeless encampment, or whatever it is, you can report it right from your phone. So that's coming. We put an RFP out for that. We've been getting a lot of questions from the consultants. There's a lot of them out there that provide that service. That's due on the 9th, on the 10th. We figure that we'll probably be bringing it to council maybe in September for a recommendation for one of those companies. We're going to bring the marketing contract to council. We're shooting for the 16th, but we're still working something out. It may end up going in August. But that's that whole marketing thing for us to help recruit businesses, tourists, and then also to start to lift and liven the internal conversation that Oroville has. We also have that other thing I've told you about a couple of times. We're going to start to develop that coming up in July. That's that program where someone can go online on our website, and then they can start to work out what their project might be. So it's a decision tree that they'll work through. Is it residential? Is it commercial? And then are they going to build a room addition, a kitchen remodel? Is it just a roof? Are they going to turn something into a retail space, into a restaurant? And they'll click through a whole series of things that'll take them right down all the way to what they'll have to do for that, what they want to do. So it'll give them a general, reasonable idea of what the cost will be based on what they've answered, subject to what the actual plans come in when they come back in. But we'll try to give them a good estimate of what's coming. But it'll help a person understand what they have to go through, the outside agencies that they'll have to work with, and and little things about the code that they might have to deal with, like, they want to do a kitchen remodel, we'll consider the electrical and the plumbing, those kind of things that the novice wouldn't necessarily know. So it's hopefully will increase customer experience and reduce frustration with people when they actually come to the counter and they're ready to do something. And then they can noodle on it in the middle of the night when they wake up and they start to think about their kitchen. They can start to play with the website. You can come in as a guest and use it that way, or you can create yourself an account and you can come back again and again to that same thing and change things around and try to figure out what you want to do. So the initial one that we put out will be very basic, but they're going to train us on how to build it. So we'll be building it over time, and if and when it's running, and if you want to play around with it, if you see things that we can add in there, by all means, let us know. Like, it'd be helpful to have this note, and we can just put a note on the side of some certain page. We just had the 4th Civic 101 episode. It was who was that? It was fire.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one coming up is housing. Amy's going to do something about housing and business development. And they all have been really good, and the people that have been coming have really been interested, and so it's been going really well. We're going to do it again next time. We got Mike Phelps from Metalworks in there and Eric Johansson from Pre-Zero, and they were really engaged, so they're going to help us promote that through the next time around. And I think lastly we have, what was that I wanted to let you know? Christina?
We have new commissioners.
New commissioners coming up. I mean, we're going to take the executive team committee met, and they're going to have a recommendation to council for the next at the next meeting. That wasn't what I was going to say. But yes, thank you for that.
Because I do have the names.
Dang it! I had one more thing that's really cool. Oh. I think it's not really a planning commission thing, but I think I may have mentioned to before that we started working with Butte College to develop a local training facility here in Orrville. So it'll be a satellite campus of a trade school. What we're angling for is a robotics program. So when we first started talking with them several months ago, I started calling the different manufacturers to ask them what would be helpful for them, and they resoundingly all said robotics would be great. So we're working with that program with them. It's going to take about 3 years to actually develop, because they have to get the teachers, they have to build the curriculum. But we had a really great kickoff meeting on Tuesday, and so now they're ready to get started. They're going to be doing one-on-ones with each of the manufacturers to really drill down and what exactly do they need to have to help their businesses. But the whole idea is to provide opportunities for the people that live here that either want to start a career or change careers, and to help the businesses that are here to have a steady flow of people coming in. And we're considering also doing something like possibly also eventually something that will support the biomass industry, because we have had a lot of interest in that. We have one company that's coming here. We have one that was coming here, but now they're just right outside of town. And so we have 2 companies that are coming. I'm trying to recruit some more. And I feel like I have some traction, although it dawned on me that's a $150 million startup. So they're not just going to say, yeah, where do I sign up? So I'm trying to do some recruiting for those kind of businesses. Also thinking about a battery manufacturer, and maybe doing some sort of batteries that we could plug in and use around town to help. I don't know. There's just a lot of things that we're sort of playing with here. So,
Awesome.
Anyone else over there? Sorry, that was a mouthful. I didn't intend to
great
say that.
info.
Just sort of vomiting stuff.
I did see recently about San Diego area had a big battery storage facility that caught fire, and there was quite a few issues about that. So mitigation would be a huge.
Yeah, big time. So those guys are working all that stuff out so that we'll know how to do it better. There was also, the mayor had toured a really large battery facility right next, it's a PG&E owned, it's on PG&E campus, it's owned by Tesla or some sort of joint venture, but they also had a fire, and then they found out that when you spray them with water, it ruins the battery. So now they've got the whole thing with chemicals, and they raise them up a little bit. So hopefully by the time that we're ready to have anything coming, that'll be worked out. Oh, and we are tomorrow. The application is due for the microgrid that we've been working with an electrical, I don't know what they are, energy engineering company. They've been working with us. It's been a big lift. I've been meeting with these guys regularly for a couple of months, and they've pulled tons of data. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, PG&E is required, if I haven't told you guys this already, PG&E is required to provide grants to certain communities for resilience that are in high fire zones. So we are not fully in a high fire zone, but we're enough to qualify ourselves to participate in this. And so we looked at 4 different possible locations. We kind of wanted to do them all, but they're not on the same lines. So we chose the public safety building. So if an event happens where they have to shut the power down for the whole community, that will stay live. So if we're awarded the grant, PG&E, what we've designed is 4 solar. It's a 300K solar facility there at the public facility site, and a battery and batteries. So all day long, the solar will be filling up the batteries. It's a kind of a neat program because, I mean, if we're awarded and we get this, and every day where it's blue skies and energy is being created, we get to have it. So we get to use it for our own purposes, or we get to do what we want with it.
To our local grid? It just goes.
Well, we're trying to puzzle out what we might do with that. There's maintenance that goes involved that has, so someone has to do that. So we will be using that energy in some ways to set off the cost of the maintenance. But at the end of the day, it'll still be a benefit for the city. And then if the power goes down and they have to shut everything off, that building will stay active. So it'll stay live 2 different ways. PG&E will flick a switch, which will not shut off that building.
Oh.
But if that switch is not able to flick,
You're on the battery.
the battery backup will service the facility for 3 full days.
Which
So,
facility is it?
the public safety, the police and fire on
Oh, that
Lincoln.
one. Okay, so there's enough roof space for 300?
It's not roofs. We're going to put it over it's basically along all the parking.
It's the parking.
All the
Got it.
parking that's along the west side, so in front of the fence and behind the fence, and then another bit on the north side.
Okay.
So all of that is just going to gather energy all day. It's going to power up this battery, and fingers crossed we get it. We're scoring pretty high. These engineers we're working with are fantastic, and we are. I think we may be the only ones that are actually ready to submit tomorrow on the due date. But
Awesome.
because some other ones weren't, and the PG&E realized that there was a flaw in their application calculator,
the
they
flaw.
moved it to the second. So it gives everybody a couple more days. But we're ready to submit. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Oh, as far as the 311, that reporting, have you seen the Butte County Connect?
I have not, but I've worked with several of these. Brian, maybe that's what Brian Ring has worked with before. But
I recommend it since I'm with Butte County.
the same.
People want to report a lot, and it's
Yeah.
it's web-based, and it's even got an app, and it's really easy. You could either be anonymous, or you could track what you report.
Yeah, you can be anonymous. You can track your report. It won't say who you are, who the reporter is, but it'll say there's already 4 reports for that incident at that site. And then you can choose there's already 4, I'll just pass, or you can add yourself as a 5th, and then you can go back in and you can look to see what the action is. So
what I was
you'll
wondering.
know, like, okay, so now code enforcement has it.
Yes.
It's been assigned, they've taken some action, and they're reporting now that it's complete.
Yeah, I think it's helpful rather than somebody calling in and wondering if anybody actually, took their complaint.
I've worked with 2 different cities and with 4 of those things. So both cities, while I was there, had one and then switched to another one. And they're relatively all the same, everyone has their favorites. But for me, I was part of the implementation team in Encinitas switching over. But I honestly, the one they went to was a little bit more fun because it has a dial that you can turn on your phone. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same thing. You pick your department, you go through, you pick the crime, graffiti, take a picture, geocodes it, it maps it to GIS, and then it tells the department exactly what to do and where it is.
So it replaces the code enforcement form that we fill out now?
No. You could go either way. We're not replacing anything. We're just augmenting. So
So do you still have to do a code enforcement form?
no, you wouldn't have to.
Okay, so
Sorry.
you do either one?
You can do either way. Yeah,
Okay.
we're not replacing it, but we're replacing
Okay.
the requirement that you would have to do that. So,
Okay.
Actually, I don't know. I have not exactly consulted Ron Ron knows we're doing this. We've talked about, he's really excited about the thing, but we haven't talked about that.
That's
so,
like an official form you
so
have to sign,
before I
you
say
have to
that,
put your name down.
I'll have to talk to Ron about that.
Okay.
All right. That's all. I've held you guys here long enough.
All right, if that's it, we will adjourn to July 25th, 2024 at 6 PM.